Welcome everyone. It's day 2 or day 3 of Ignite. I don't even know at this point because that Monday always throws me off. I'm pleased to have Ben Thomas with me. Ben's calling all the way in from New Zealand, so there is a massive time zone difference between he and I right now. So I really want to thank him for jumping on this call. Thank you, Ben. Um, Ben is an MVP like myself, but Ben, why don't you just take like 10, 15 seconds, just give a little overview of what you do on a day-to-day basis, like what your day job is and like, what you touch every day.
Yeah, man. First, any inaccuracies are due to lack of coffee this morning because it's 6 a.m. here. But yeah, so I work for an MSP hoster, all outsourced provider down in New Zealand. We're across Australia, New Zealand, parts of South Asia, all that kind of stuff. Day to day, I'm involved in mostly our hosting platforms, but that's working with customers in a consulting space. I'm a solutions advisor. Um, and so looking at offerings across on-prem, public cloud, our own platforms, how customers can take advantage of the various features and functionalities that meet their needs as their business changes, basically.
Yeah, and I feel like I come to you whenever I have questions outside my little bubble of the IT world because you and your company definitely touches like 100 different technologies, not just Microsoft stuff. You definitely have some intimacy with VMware from a hosting perspective, but specifically to the Microsoft world, I know you've been involved with the WSSD program since the mid 2010s, if
Yeah, yeah,
not a
we
little. Yeah.
exactly. We in the original WSSD program, we built a hosting platform using System Center and Windows Server and all those technologies that came out, S2D and all that. I built it for dedicated customers under consulting engagements. We've gone through Azure Stack HCI deployments for customers as that evolved through its various forms of Azure Stack HCI, the version 1 and 2. We were a hub adopter early on for Azure Stack Hub. So we had that running both, as a hoster. So yeah, there's a lot of Microsoft technology over the last kind of 8 years or so that we've been involved in.
Yeah, and that is why I think this is like a perfect time to talk about the changes that have been announced at Ignite, the name changes, kind of new products, new features and stuff. So especially with all the things you've touched over the last decade plus, let's just jump into the name change with Azure Local and what that means. And I think the best way I've seen it phrased by Microsoft is Azure Local subsumes Azure Stack HCI. It is literally a replacement for the name and the program, but it's not just that. Like it's not just a singular like thing you can go a widget that you can go buy. It is a program that overarches into many things. It's not just an OS. So immediate reactions when you heard the name change and what your gut tells you. Honest to
Yeah,
God reaction.
yeah. I mean, look, there's always the joke, right? Microsoft loves to rename products. It happens a lot. So it's two sides of the coin. On one hand, it's kind of like, oh no, now we have to kind of work out what the new messaging is and help customers get their head around whether what they have now is still the new thing or whether they have to go buy something else to get the
Hmm.
latest
Hmm.
services and stuff. And that is a little mixed with the whole, Azure HCI becomes part of Azure Local. And so you see messaging online on platforms like Blue Sky and the likes where people are going, so is it HCI now just local? Is it the same thing? What's the difference? There's a lot of mixed messaging going on. So I think for me it's, yeah, like you said, right? It is HCI, but it's not just HCI, right? I think we'll see the platform evolve to include more than just HCI scenarios. We saw it at the end of Azure Stack HCI already Dell starting to bring through some external storage offerings and
Hmm.
other
Hmm.
various partners looking at how they can expand outside of just the traditional approach we've been doing since the WSSD days.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of interest at the edge for smaller form factors and
Hmm.
reducing the requirements down. There's a lot more going on, and I think the HCI name used to really constrict what they could do without people going, but it's HCI, so how can it be HCI and do this thing? So
Right.
by
Right.
removing a technology name from the product and from the new suite, I think is a smart move because it will remove that blocker. It just means we're now going to have a little bit of confusion as people trying to work out exactly what local is and how different it is from what they had yesterday.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and I think it's a case of today, if you were to get access to the preview, it might not look that different, but it's the first step. And I think there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff coming down the line now that there's not this tie to that name as we see Microsoft really start to ramp up around that Azure local experience.
I think that's an awesome point. I think I mentioned that in a video with JT the other day. The name was constricting, if you will. It definitely, like, you're going to see these small form factor things that may resemble an Intel NUC or some ruggedized appliance. Hell, with ARM builds of server and client becoming a reality, who knows what may show up one day. You may get an ARM build that can run on even a smaller form factor, a low power IoT device that may, like, you can put in an outdoor environment, whatever. And by having HCI, it's not hyperconverged. There's may not even be a network involved in some of these cases. And I think that's a perfect segue to the next topic that we kind of brushed on already, the disconnected operations perspective of this. So we talked about, what used to be Azure Stack HCI, your traditional connected, and then your low spec IoT kind of device that may appear. But your disconnected operations, which everyone seems to have beaten into their head that's Azure Stack Hub or Azure Stack Edge. And are those things even products anymore? Are they dead? Are they kind of dead? And now we have this other thing that is adjacent to it. So as a hub operator for many years, significantly more educated in it than I ever am, will be, especially if it is dead. Thoughts on the disconnected operations thing that is going to be coming out next year?
Yeah. I mean, obviously we're low on details of exactly how disconnected is going to work at the moment. Obviously they talk about preview starting next year and that sort of thing. I think from the material that is available, it's not going to be the same as Hub. Hub was a black box that you got into your data center, and it was essentially, an entire Azure Stack, for a better name, in your data center, right? And from an operator perspective, that was good and bad. There was a lot of constraint around it, but it also, there was a lot of responsibility that you didn't really have to worry about because it was automatically taken care of. It looked after internal secrets. It looked after internal identity. All those services came down as you just kind of clicked add and hey presto, it turned up. So Hub had a lot of good stuff going for it. And I think the challenge was it took a bit to maintain. Everyone wanted more and more services down. And as we know, some of those Azure services aren't actually small beasts, and so trying to fit it in your own data center is a little bit hard. So the approach, yeah. So I think the disconnected approach, where building on top of the more open approach that Azure Stack HCI and the WSSD program had, with it's not an entire black box. There's a bit more responsibility the customers have to take, and therefore the customers have to be a bit more careful with how they operate it. And then bringing some of that experience down so you don't have to have it connected. If you're maybe on a boat and you need to have, compute that's around, doesn't always have internet connectivity, or, on a plane, or, if you're one of the F1 companies and you want to ship a rig around the world with your F1 cars to get data out of and stuff.
Sure.
Like there's a whole bunch of scenarios where you don't necessarily need it to be completely locked down, but you can't guarantee you're going to have internet connectivity at all times. And so it's that Azure experience. You still want to be able to provision your workloads. You still want to be able to, get some of those native services going, containers and stuff. And that ability to do it now in a disconnected fashion is going to really open up scenarios, again, that constricted HCI in the past. So I think it's more looking at, hey, we had all these customers using stuff like Azure Stack HCI who didn't want to go all in to Hub, but needed some disconnected capabilities. And so Azure Local Disconnected is going to be that, that bridging step with they, what they could get on HCI is what they wanted, but they just needed that disconnected scenario.
Yeah, no, I think that hits it perfectly. I can remember like 8 years ago, before we jumped into the WSSD, we were on like 2016 TP4, right? Like early preview of S2D. And the comment came up like, maybe we should use at the time Azure Stack, with now Azure Stack Hub. And like the limiting factor for us was just like VM density. Like we didn't really have the flexibility of hey, we really just only want to run VMs on this, and we want to cram as many of them as we can in there, and we want like dynamic memory and this and that. And we were basically like, nope, if this is the size of your SAMP, this is the amount of VMs you can fit on it, because just predetermined SKUs. And we were like, this is too much money. We just can't use this. It's not a viable
Yeah, well, so
solution.
it had all the Azure constructs. So, like I say, it was a cut down version of Azure.
Yeah,
So it had
yeah.
managed disks, and so managed
Hmm.
disks have I/O profiles in certain sizes and stuff. And so
Right.
you got that with Hub. Those same, but there are differences when you design for public cloud. You had to have
Hmm.
those same differences when you were designing for Hub. It wasn't like running a VMware environment or a Hyper-V environment on Windows Server where you could just go in and tweak every VM's tiny settings specifically how you wanted it.
Right.
Um, Pros and cons, right? It means you didn't have to think about, how many CSVs do I have? How full is that CSV? All that
Hmm.
kind of stuff.
Hmm.
It helped take care of that and it obscured that away. Now
Yeah.
with things like Azure Local, you will have to worry about those things, but you can, if you need to, get under the hood and tweak things. So it's trade-offs, flexibility versus responsibility.
Yeah. No, I think that's a excellent point. So the other big news, other than just Azure Local, and I was surprised to hear this. There was some feedback about some of these sessions with Windows Server. So Windows Server 2025 is GA. It was G8 in the beginning of November, kind of quietly. I think they were trying to save the grandeur for Ignite. I heard that these sessions for Windows Server were like packed, line out the door. People couldn't get in. And I want to take a minute, like that's really good news, because I think a lot of people still have this taste in their mouth that Windows Server, or specifically like the hypervisor functionality in Windows Server, is like dead. Like if you want Hyper-V, you can't. You got to use what's now Azure Local. It was Azure Stack HCI. So we've been seeing Microsoft beat that messaging to death. Like Hyper-V is alive. It's alive and well. It's used in all these places, right? We all know that. But like, let's take a minute and talk about Windows Server 2025, the latest release. Obviously, it has Hyper-V as a feature. And then in tandem with it, you also have your System Center suite. Also, 2025 was released as well. So your traditional data center management stuff is still available. What things kind of blew you out of the water or impressed you with what they've announced about Server 2025 so far?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just step back a second, just on the messaging part. It's quite funny, right? I think because everyone's so used to things coming out so quickly now with public clouds and all those
Yeah.
other services, because Windows Server comes out kind of every 3 or 4 years, everyone's like, will it come out though? Will I see it again? Will it
Right.
have any improvements? And it's kind of funny because Windows Server is also the one that everyone's like, oh, but I can, what's the oldest version of Windows Server you're running? And a lot of
Hmm.
people, it's like, oh, one before what's still supported, 2012 R2. Isn't
Yeah,
that end of
yeah, yeah.
life? Yeah, I'm getting onto it. So, while everyone's kind of looking for it to come out fast, no one's going to
Hmm.
adopt it fast. So it's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
funny.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, so some of the crazy things with Windows Server 2025, for example, on that upgrade path is that you can now do N-4 upgrades. So if you
I'm
are still
so
running
happy you said that. Yeah, yeah,
2012
yeah.
R2, like you can hop, skip, and jump all the way to 2025 in one upgrade.
Hmm.
I would really love to find a customer doing that because I know they spend a whole bunch of time on the compatibility of applications coming for that entire path because they want
Yeah.
to enable it.
Hmm.
I've seen some stats around common apps they see, and at least going 2019 to 2025 and maintaining 100% compatibility there. So I think that should be anyone who's got old boxes and looking to upgrade them, have a look seriously if you'll be if your AV provider supports it and all that stuff at going to
Yeah, yeah.
2025. Um, Outside of that, there's a whole bunch of awesome security features in it. There's new service accounts. There's managed service account options out there that actually
Hmm.
make service accounts way easier than they were before and entirely remove passwords from them. There's new hardening in SMB and SMB over QUIC finally coming out in 2025.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's just oodles of awesome stuff. If you're doing Hyper-V on Windows Server, like all of the features and functionality that Azure Stack HCI built up, that coming back together of all the hypervisor products means all those good things are coming in, all the GPU enhancements
Hmm.
and scale enhancements. I mean, you can now do network controller as a feature of the failover cluster as opposed to
Right.
having to deploy VMs to run network controllers. So all that functionality is now there just out of the box without having to work out how to deploy it. So I think, there's some really exciting stuff in Windows Server. And like you say, it was seen by pictures I saw from Ignite of rooms full of people wanting to hear about Windows Server for the first time in a while.
Yeah, and it's weird again. Just to get back to that messaging, we keep getting back to like Microsoft messaging changes. I can remember like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a slide that was like Windows Server is where you run your workloads on as VMs, and they live on Azure Stack HCI. It's like no, this is the reality of the situation. It still has a place on bare metal, and it does really really well. There have been tremendous storage improvements. I think they like the specifically like ReFS and ReFS deduplication had major upgrades that were brought in from Azure Stack HCI 23H2 because you have to remember
Yeah.
everything kind of it's a one branch, and then you have these feature branches that kind of represent downstream OSs and Windows Server's LTS. So eventually they all kind of merge their way back in. So I can tell you firsthand the ReFS deduplication upgrade is a brand new feature. It's not what we've had since 2019. It is significantly better performant. There's some caveats with like compression and specifically like where you actually see your data savings, but I think like 95% of the customer base is going to love it. And again, oodles and oodles of upgrades. I don't want to waste too much time here going through each and every one of them. There's been numerous presentations on this. I know Jeff Woolsey has talked ad nauseum about this. So we'll try to link something from him in the details if people want to see that. The one thing I wanted to just get back to was System Center. Again,
Mhm.
a lot of customers, myself included, I know you used to be a consumer of it. System Center 2025 is also generally available now. Obviously, it supports Windows Server 2025, but it also supports what used to be called the artist formerly known as Azure Stack HCI 23H2 and all its new build numbers and whatnot. So that was a blocker. That was a blocker for me, upgrading the 23H2 from 22H2. So if you're not trying to jump on that HCI Azure Local ARB portal experience right away, because you don't necessarily need to, especially if you're doing in-place upgrades, System Center VMM supports it now. So you can continue to manage your workloads using your traditional tools and scripts and everything else you have there. So really, really cool. Just staying on the server bandwagon for another moment, there were some other licensing and cost-related things that were kind of finally publicly documented and announced. I think like people have been asking for stuff like this forever. We've seen a lot of noise, especially around like the archification of things, like Arc enable
Mhm.
this and Arc
Mhm.
enable that. So I know you were really excited yesterday. You called out the new Arc management pricing differences with Windows Server. So I'm gonna leave it to you. Go ahead and,
Yeah, yeah.
and give everyone the news.
Yeah, so I mean, so yeah, the two big things that came out with 2025 and the evolution of Arc, right? One is pay-as-you-go Windows licensing through Azure Arc. And people are like, I buy my licenses, so what? If you're running a branch server or data center or whatever, and you've got Windows Server standard licensing, and you're buying, 2 packs for every single,
Hmm.
2 VMs you spin up, and you get to that, I've spent my 10 VMs for my current packs, and I just need a VM for a month to do a project. Pay-as-you-go licensing. You pay for it while you're using it. You spin that VM up, you pay for it, you get rid of the VM, you stop paying for it. You don't have to go buy a 2 pack you're stuck with, wasted money there. Hosters, I mean, obviously I do hosting. For hosters who, are looking at minimizing their supply costs,
Hmm.
their customers on their platforms now can do PayGo licensing. It's, allowed on hosting platforms. So that's a huge win there. And then off the back of that, they just announced the GA of Arc Windows Server Management Experience. And so that's your things like, you add the Arc agent on, it shows up in the portal, and you can access Windows Admin Center through the portal to
Hmm.
manage your machines. And the big one, that everyone is kind of interested in as a result of them talking about deprecating WSUS, that we've used for years and years and
Hmm.
decades to do
Hmm.
patching, is that Azure Update Management is now included for free if you're doing PayGo licensing or a subscription service like Software Assurance. So
Hmm.
that's a huge
Hmm.
one because I mean I've used Update Management. I know you've used Update Management. And it's a
Yep.
pretty slick experience that scales
Hmm.
really well and kind of gets around
Hmm.
some of those bugbears you used to have with WSUS and GPO management for patching,
Yep.
and
Yep. Yep.
whether
Yep.
or not it would retry in the window you needed it to retry, and
Yep.
could you set the right exclusions, and so
Yeah.
update management works for now. Yeah, great. That's Joe. It's too
Coffee
early.
time.
There's not
Yeah,
enough
dude.
coffee. But yeah, it works fantastically well, and now it's included in your your subscription costs. You don't have to have that $5 uplift to use it. And like I said,
Hmm.
other things like Windows Admin Center and stuff are actually really nice to use in the portal. If you're remote supporting, you get a call at 3 a.m. You can jump into that portal admin center, start looking at what the thing's
Yep.
up to without having to find your VPN, log into the jump box, then log into the box itself. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's some really great stuff coming through in that Windows Server management experience through it as well.
Yeah, I think it's great. Like you said, we are a consumer of a ton of traditional Windows Server, especially VMs. And you're and like you, it all dovetails together. If you're talking about Azure Local, you're talking about probably modernizing your data center for a lot of people, right? Or maybe they're doing VMware migrations. They don't want to be on
Mhm.
VMware anymore. So you're P2Ving old physical infrastructure. So like that's step one. Those VMs that are landing on, let's say, Azure Local. They're probably, if they're not Linux, they're probably running just a traditional Windows Server branded SKU. So as you're dumping more and more VMs into a consolidated environment, you got to think about the management of them. Uh, this is a really, especially if they're already licensed. Like if you have volume licensing, you have an EA, whatever, however you have your subscription for your licensing, or even if you didn't, maybe you might have been doing things illegitimately. We know there's plenty of small mom and pop businesses that have done that. I've weaseled my nose into that before and seen some horror stories. And the capex of buying like 16 cores of licensing is like traumatizing to accounting departments, but that opex cost is a little bit more palatable in certain cases. So the PayGo model is really slick, especially if you're decomming, right? Like you're migrating things
Mhm.
off.
Mhm.
Maybe you can't do that in-place upgrade N-4, but they got to run just a little bit longer, but you don't want to swallow that pill for 3 years with software assurance. So you do the PayGo, you dump these things in there, you can manage them remotely, you could do updates remotely with it. It's been a long time coming. It feels like it should have been 4 years ago, but here we are. It is what it is. I think you also get ESU with the archification. If you arc enable your Windows servers, really old stuff, I
Yeah,
think you get ESU too.
I mean, you
Which,
definitely do if you're running them on Azure
oh,
Local. You get
that is
ESU
true.
with
Right,
those.
right, 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 right.
But
So
yeah,
yeah,
I think possibly with yeah. Check
so
check with your licensing people. I'm not a licensing guy, but
yeah, yeah, yeah,
there
yeah. So
might
I
be
mean,
ESUs with that as well.
so there's a lot of pros to this whole ecosystem. It's growing. It's all good, positive things. I will say this. I will like. I don't want to sound like a cheerleader the whole time. There are some caveats that have kind of not been fleshed out yet with Azure Local. And I'm bringing it up because you're wearing a Veeam shirt. So like the backup and restore and high availability and BCDR story, there's a lot of things that are still fluid and coming out. One of the things that I know for a fact is, at least today, isn't a thing yet, is the ability to project existing VMs or like brownfield VMs, as I'll call them, into the Azure portal through that ARB experience. And this is specific to Azure Local, right? So if you're running Azure Local 23, whatever, I guess 11 is the most current release train, or it will be maybe. Um, and you're like, I want to move, I want to use Veeam, or I want to use Commvault, or I want to use whatever my backup solution to move these VMs from VMware or from Windows Server, whatever, to Azure Local. Cool, you get your VMs running, they're there. But if that's the tool you're using, they don't project into the Azure portal experience. So that hydration isn't there. Um, I have feelings about that, just kind of like working for an ISV that has to worry about my customers' workloads. What's your feeling on this? Is this like a game breaker for people, or do you think this is kind of a, nice to have when it gets there, it gets there?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's kind of what I touched on with Windows Server as well. Like when a new version of something comes out, there's always a lag of
Mhm.
ISV integrations. Some people stick with Windows Defender to begin with because their AV client can't work with a new version. And I guess because what was Azure Stack HCI, what's now Azure Local, isn't isn't just an OS. Like
Mhm.
there's all the other components that go with it because it's a cloud integrated system. Um, that there is these issues and these incompatibilities that exist today. I think the bottom line is you can still protect and restore your machines. Like
Mhm.
you're not getting onto this platform having no data protection. But and the in-guest, like the Windows management experience Arc stuff will still come back. So if you restore a VM and it's got the Arc agent on it, it's reporting home for your PayGo licensing and your update management and stuff, that feature and functionality will come back with it. But you won't be able to update your cores or the hard drives attached to it through the Azure experience. You know, we don't really touch on it, but you could still fire up Hyper-V Manager and point it, or Windows Admin Center and point it, at least in 23H2 you can with this problem. And so you can then still adjust those with local tools, just not the cloud experience.
Right.
Look, it's one of those things. I think it's a when, not an if. Will it be fixed? And you just got to say to yourself, well, what's the most important thing at this point in time? You know, what are the features I'm using the most? Do I care in a DR scenario or a ransomware attack or something? Do I care about whether or not I can see it in the portal for changing the start and stop of the VM? Maybe that's in your BCP plan, it's down the list, and it's like, yeah, we'll sort out how we figure that out later. There are some tips and tricks some other MVPs have blogged about around how you can kind of create a ghost VM and swap the VHDs out, and it kind of works. But yeah, it's I don't think it's a blocker for someone unless you're going like whole hog into your automation using all the infrastructure management piece, because again, the in-guest stuff isn't going away with those hydrations. It's just that infrastructure piece.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I agree. Like, again, I have to wear two different hats for this story. At the end of the day, there probably is a very small group of people that like absolutely require that for their DR scenarios. But like you said, those classic tools, they still work. It's not like they deprecated FCM and ripped it out of the OS completely. So there's always ways to deal with it. All right, man. Thank you so much for the time. Before we go, any last comments, thoughts that you want to take your time and kind of lay out here before we call it?
Yeah, I mean, just anyone who is kind of around the edges of Ignite, if you're not attending in person and stuff, just take the time. There is a crap ton of blogs coming out from Microsoft. A lot of the content's going on the Ignite or the Microsoft YouTube streams and stuff. Like, it might take a week or so, but just every afternoon, go look at a section or a blog of a thing you're interested in. Windows Server, Azure Local, AKS, we haven't even touched on that. There's a whole bunch of AKS improvements.
Goodness, yeah.
AVD, another favorite subject. Like, yeah, there's a lot of content coming out. This year's Ignite is huge. So I don't think it'll stop at the end of the week.
Perfect. Yep. All right, man. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon. I really appreciate everything.
No, thanks for having me.
All right.